Until this moment, the main character would never have thought that this was possible. He used to live like any normal person, but one day death came to his soul. He tried desperately to escape death, but it was always there. This place was completely different from the world in which he lived. In his world he was an ordinary librarian, but in this world he became a completely different person. The story begins with the main character being diagnosed with liver cancer. He had been having frequent nausea lately, so he went to the hospital where he was diagnosed with cancer. The hospital told him that if he had come back later, there would have been almost no chance of a cure. The doctor told him not to worry so much because now he has a chance to recover. The main character, whose name was Inhan, could not believe what he was hearing. He returned to his filthy apartment, and the thought of dying sent shivers down his spine. He was not an alcoholic, but in order to dull his stress he decided to get drunk. In his mind there was confusion as to why he was doing this because he had never done anything wrong and had always worked hard. His father died of stomach cancer, and now he has it too. He spent all his savings on his father's medical bills, and then his mother died in a car accident. He felt great rage and anger at the world, and he was determined to do whatever it took to survive. The next day he came to work and gave his supervisor a letter of resignation. His boss supported him and told him that as soon as he was cured he should go back to work. Inhan was gathering his personal belongings and was about to leave. Suddenly he was approached by colleagues who gave him an envelope with money. They collected some money because they wanted to do something to help. He saw the envelope and cried because he never thought he would be in this situation. Naturally he thanked them and then left. A few months later, when he was undergoing chemotherapy, he noticed that his hair was starting to fall out of his head. He also felt that every day he was getting worse and worse. He knew that at this rate he would surely die and the doctors would use him as a guinea pig to use experimental drugs. The next day he went to church where the priest explained to everyone that their illnesses were caused only by their unbelief in God. From his podium he shouted that the only way to be saved was to pray for his life. Then he took out a basket and told people to put money in it, thus proving his faith. Inhan prayed at this time and asked God to help and heal him. And if he heals Inhan, Inhan will pay back everything he has. After another 2 months, you could see the terrible sight of Inhan becoming very thin. As he looked at himself in the mirror, he realized that chemotherapy wasn't working either, and that he couldn't cure cancer with it. He lay in his house and wondered if he were to die and not be able to read his favorite books. Suddenly he remembered one of the books he used to read. The book told the story of a man who cured cancer through meditation. This book was called Teaching Meditation and was not very popular. That same day he began to try to meditate because he had no other choice. After a month of training, he could sometimes feel his chi energy, and after 3 months, he felt the chi energy moving inside him. After a while he ran out of money and the only solution was to sell the house and move to a professional meditation training center. It was a training center where people practiced and improved their meditation skills. Also, some masters, knowing about Inhan's illness, tried to heal him with their energy. Inhan usually meditates in a quiet place in nature near trees and a river. Meditation was his last hope, but it didn't do much to improve his health. All these thoughts drove him even more depressed and brought tears to his eyes. Suddenly he was approached by one of the monks who said that life is just one of the clouds in the sky. He also advised him to let go of his strong lust for life, and only then would he find true peace. These words infuriated Inhan because how could a monk say such a thing and thereby devalue all Inhan's efforts? He reprimanded him. Is it wrong that a young man like me wants to live? Stop being so careless about other people's problems. The monk said he didn't mean it, but at that moment, Inhan had already run desperately into the monastery. Inhan decided to gather the right things and find a place where he could get better energy. It was a sunny day, and he was walking through the woods looking for that place with very good energy. Suddenly his eyes went dark and he felt dizzy, indicating he was in poor health. He leaned against a nearby tree and tried to recover. But suddenly he had another seizure that was much stronger than the last one. He lost coordination and accidentally slipped. There was a sharp cliff next to it, where it fell straight down. Luckily there was water, and he had a chance to survive. When he fell it was like his head started to shake. Because of the high altitude, he fell deep under the water, and he had to come up for air. But after thinking about it, he realized that it was probably better to die like this than to die in a hospital in agony. Instead of living in constant pain, he didn't want to suffer anymore, so he didn't even try to resurface. He woke up from being washed ashore. He realized he didn't even get to die the way he wanted to. He looked at the forest ahead and tried to figure out where he was now. He originally thought it was empty Karen, but the terrain wasn't quite the same. He decided to go into the woods and try to think logically about where he might be now. Inhan knew he had to stay calm and figure out what had happened. There was definitely a waterfall where he fell, but he woke up in a completely different place. It reminded him of a recent novel where the main character woke up in an unknown place and fought hard to stay alive. Inhan slipped the thought that perhaps he had entered the other world through the water, but he realized that this was unlikely. He sat down near a tree and laid out the things he had in his backpack. There was also enough food to go around for a while. He was getting colder because of his wet clothes, so he decided to make a fire. Neither a lighter nor a torch helped him get the fire going because they were drowned in water. But luckily he remembered the book he was reading and figured out how to start a fire in the wilderness. He used a spare set of shoelaces and a stick to make a fire. He just needed to rub fast and hard to create friction. He tried to rub, but it didn't work. He even hurt his hand bloody, making many attempts to. He had no choice but to try again and again. Finally he ignited a small spark which he began to gradually fan. After a few minutes, he finally lit the fire. Night fell, and he sat by the fire in his blanket. I wonder what kind of terrain this is. Have I really entered another world? He decided that when dawn came, he should go to the high ground to see the surroundings. Suddenly he heard a terribly loud roar that was repeated several times. He thought it was a wolf, but realized the roar didn't sound like a wolf. Suddenly he heard something again, and it sounded like a human scream. This time he heard a woman screaming, and he was immediately struck by fear and confusion about what to do. It was a huge orc dragging the girl along the ground by her hair and constantly growling. The girl was in tears and she was dripping blood. Hearing the screams, Inhin came closer to help the girl and suddenly saw the horror of it all. He saw a huge green orc and immediately realized that it really is another world. Inhin understood that if nothing helps, the girl will die. But he himself was incredibly afraid of what he saw. He also realized that if he went alone against this monster, he would be crushed. At this time the girl tried to get out of the orc's huge hand, but it was all in vain. This made the orc become furious and hit the girl with his big wooden club. A lot of blood was scattered in different directions, and suddenly the orc heard something strange to his left side. It was Inhin who almost gave away his position and didn't say goodbye to life. His whole body was trembling with fear and his heart was beating very fast. After a minute, the horrible orc left without Inhin noticing. Inhin approached the body of the murdered girl, which was horribly bloody. He couldn't just leave her lying there, so I decided to bury her and make a grave. He stood in front of her and blamed himself for not being able to help this girl. Anyway, he doesn't have much time to think because if he stays here he too can be attacked by this monster. Suddenly he heard a strange rustling in the bushes to his left. He turned around and was horrified by what he saw. It was a huge black panther that approached him in slow steps. She roared at him, and with her eyes alone she already inspired great fear. Inhan thought of trying to escape, but realized that it would be useless and the faithful panther would catch him in a jiffy. He was so scared he couldn't even move. He had seen black panthers in documentaries before, but this one was at least twice as big. He accidentally stepped on a branch with his foot, and that really got the panther's attention, and she growled even harder and showed her huge fangs. Inhan understood that he could not run, but he could not fight either, and all he could do was hope for a miracle. Suddenly a deer came out of the bushes and was spotted by the panther. Without a second thought, she immediately pounced on him with her whole body. With her fangs she clawed right into the deer's throat, thus killing it. Taking advantage of the panther's distraction, Inhin quickly ran the other way. He ran for 10 minutes without stopping, thinking that the panther was constantly chasing him. Inhin breathed in a lot of air and was constantly short of breath. Finally realizing no one was after him, he stopped and tried to catch his breath. Such intense fear and intense running caused him to vomit and start throwing up. He realized he almost died and remembered the orc he had seen, the panther, and the animal that looked like a deer. From now on he was sure that this place was definitely not planet Earth. He looked at the stars and thought that even if he tried his best to survive it would probably be useless, especially since he had cancer and would die sooner or later. It was a cold morning the next day. He was in his sleeping bag, but he was still very cold. He thought he might warm himself if he collected chi energy in the abdominal cavity. So without thinking, he sat down in a meditative pose and began to concentrate. He felt a strange sensation because he could collect a huge amount of energy chi. Until now, whenever he absorbed chi energy, the cancer cells took most of it. But now after meditation he feels the chi energy gathering in his stomach. Chi opens up and moves down his spine. No matter how hard he tried before, it was impossible. But now he can do it with ease. His initial chi energy completed a small circle around his body and turned into real chi. If he can keep it up, he can get out. One morning, washing in the river, he noticed something. After a few weeks since he started training his body and energy chi by eating fruit and fish, his body recovered and just now he began to build muscle. His hair began to grow back and his pain slowly faded, proof that the cancer cells might already be dying. Moreover, his eyesight has also greatly improved. Now that he has finished washing, he should continue to practice his chi energy. When he came ashore, he noticed the mark of a large animal. He realized that it was probably that huge black panther. As he approached his small camp, he also saw these footprints there and saw a slightly torn sleeping tent. He thought he had managed to avoid the animals so far, but apparently the animal had tracked him down. His body recovered well and he gained some muscle. But that didn't mean he could fight this beast with his bare hands. In-hin realized that he needed to make a suitable weapon and then he would have a chance to. Initially he thought of a spear, but realized that he should avoid close combat because he could die from just one animal bite. Then he thought of the bow and imagined how he would fight with a bow and arrow, but he discarded the idea because the bow is too difficult to make, and it would take too long to master this weapon alone. He wanted a compact and portable weapon that was easy to make. Since he had read a lot, he remembered a weapon that was mentioned in the book. The weapon was called a sling and was quite effective against animals. This weapon has incredible destructive power due to centrifugal force. It is very easy to make, a fairly primitive weapon, but quite effective. If he can control the weapon properly, he will be able to easily defeat the Black Panther. He didn't have a lot of materials and was thinking about what materials to use for his slingshot. After 15 minutes he had made something like a sling, and it seemed strong enough. He took the stone and put it in the sack in the middle of the sling. He took it and spun it over his head. He set himself the task of hitting that tree with his slingshot, which was about 20 meters away. Unfortunately, he didn't hit the tree, but he was very close. In-hin knew that without practice it would be difficult to hit the target. He tried again to spin the sling and throw a stone with it. This time he did not hit a tree but was able to hit a branch. He realized that he needed to let go of the stone at the moment when the sling is spinning at maximum speed. He realized this and decided to try again, and his intuition told him that this time he would succeed. Finally the stone hit the tree and he was very happy about it. He realized that he needed to keep practicing in order to become proficient with this weapon. He will have to learn this weapon quickly to use it in real combat. Walking through the woods, he spotted the woods and realized it was a great opportunity to practice on a real animal. It hit her right in the head, and it was a pretty nasty sight. He's been training for 10 days and finally his training is starting to pay off. He can hit a target within 1 to 20 meters for sure. Suddenly he was seized by fear and the feeling that something was going wrong. After that he saw a Black Panther that was not far away notice him. She also smelled him and started running toward him. In-hin realized that he urgently needed to attack and quickly began to prepare for it. At that moment the Black Panther ran towards him very quickly. It was too fast, but luckily In-hin had time to start spinning the sling. The panther was about to pounce on him, and he didn't have time to strike. In fear, he quickly bounced to the opposite side and saved himself from the panther's first blow. At this close distance he didn't stand a chance, so he decided to start running. The panther turned around and saw In-hin begin to run and it triggered her animal instincts to catch up with her prey. He ran as fast as he could, but he knew that the Black Panther would catch up with him sooner or later. So as he ran, he began to prepare to hit the panther. He turned around and was ready to strike at the panther when he suddenly noticed that no one was chasing him. He realized that he was so fast that the panther couldn't keep up with him. It seemed strange to him. Perhaps it was because he was able to complete a large circle of chi energy in the body during meditation practices. He realized that he gained muscle mass and got stronger, but did not understand how his physical abilities have grown so much. Perhaps the training of the internal organs has also shown itself well. Suddenly he heard the roar of a panther that finally found him. It was the perfect distance for him to hit it. He unwrapped the sling and threw a rock at her, which perfectly hit her right in the head. The Black Panther was then stunned by the impact and fell to the ground. He looked at her as she suddenly started to get up. Apparently In-hin gave her a weak blow and that's why she survived. The Black Panther felt great pain and so began to run away. He couldn't miss her, so he chased after her. His body seemed very light, and he felt that he could easily catch up with the panther. In pursuit of her, he finally felt how much his health had improved and how incredibly his physical abilities had grown. He was glad because he knew that soon the cancer should be completely gone. Finally, he almost caught up with the Black Panther. He was running right behind her. In-hin began to untwist the sling and prepare to throw the stone at the panther. He threw a rock and hit her right in the back, the hard impact sending blood scattering in different directions. The panther was killed and fell to the ground. But suddenly he noticed a wooden spear in its body. In-hin was surprised because he had only thrown a stone, but certainly not a spear. A second passed as orcs suddenly emerged from behind the trees and spotted In-hin. It is one thing to fight a panther and another to fight orcs with spears. The orcs headed toward the panther's body and let out a very loud growl. In-hin most wanted to avoid meeting with these monsters, but he was very unlucky. 10 seconds later one of the orcs went to the panther's body and took out his spear. The orcs looked at In-hin angrily while he thought what he should do. He knew he had better run away rather than try to fight against two orcs. Suddenly a third orc approached the two orcs, holding the weakened and battered girl in his hand. The girl was covered in blood and tears were streaming from her eyes. When In-hin saw this, he immediately began to remember how he had failed to help that girl and she died. He knew that if he ran away, this girl would die just like that one. He decided that he would not run because now everything is different, and he is stronger than before. so he took the will in his fist and began to unwind the sling. Inhin knew that he had an obligation to save this woman and that he could no longer run away in fear. Inhin knew that it would be difficult if these orcs attacked him immediately after his first attack. In that case he had a good idea, and after that he attacked one of the orcs. The stone hit the shoulder of the orc with tremendous force. He screamed in pain and accidentally let the girl out of his arms. Inhin seized the moment and grabbed the girl in his arms while running very fast. It would be suicidal for Inhin to fight these 3 orcs face to face. He turned around but realized there were too many orcs and he couldn't use the slingshot. He could not run for long with the girl in his arms, so he had only one option for escape. Since he already possessed very impressive abilities, he decided to run around and push off the orc's head. He jumped very quickly and pushed off the orc's head. Because of this, he jumped very high and was headed toward a large tree branch. He jumped onto a large branch and was still holding the girl in his arms. He couldn't believe that carrying someone was able to jump so high. In any case, he had to get out of there quickly before the orcs got outnumbered. The orcs standing below were desperate, and all they could do was growl loudly. Inhin looked at the branch that was not far from him and wondered if it was possible for him to jump up to it. He had no other choice, so he decided to try to jump. Luckily, he was able to do it, and he jumped from one branch to the other, moving away from the orcs, his body getting lighter by the minute. Finally, he escaped from the orcs and came with the girl to a quiet area near the river. So he started a dialogue with her and asked her if she was okay, also asked where she was shot and told her not to worry. She did not understand a word he said because she was a foreigner. She tried to say something in her language, but Inhin could not understand her. She looked like she was from Eastern Europe, but Inhin had no idea what language she spoke. He pointed his hand at himself and identified himself. Kong Inhin. She tried to pronounce his name, and all she got was this: carry map. Inhin came to terms with this and tried to find out her name. She tried to explain her name, and her name was Milla. Using gestures, he tried to ask Milla where her family lived with her. Milla understood what Inhin meant and cried. She cried for a few minutes and Inhin was very sorry for her, even though he didn't understand what had happened. Milla took him by the hand and pulled him in a certain direction. He understood that she wanted to show something and for him to follow her. For half an hour they had been walking through the woods in the direction Milla had pointed. It was beginning to get dark, and that worried Inhin a little. Suddenly he heard strange noises and sharply covered Milla's mouth with his hand and gestured for her to be quiet. They jumped up a tree and saw a huge pack of wolves not far away. It would be very bad not to notice and pass them by. If these wolves attack at the same time, even the orcs don't stand a chance. They had only to move on as quietly as possible so that the wolves would not notice them. They walked through big, tall grass and Milla knew exactly the right direction. Suddenly Milla stopped and gestured for Inhin to be very quiet. They stealthily looked out of the grass and Inhin saw a great many orcs with clubs and other weapons. To say that Inhin was surprised is nothing to say. There were really a lot of them. Next to the orcs there were also women who were crying and were apparently their prisoners. Orcs captured even more women than Inhin thought. He realized that Milla was probably asking him to save them, but he could not defeat such a huge number of orcs. Inhin tried to calm her down and explain that he couldn't go and fight them. He wanted to save them too, and maybe he could have killed 1 or 2 orcs, but going against them all would have been suicidal. Even though he has a long-range weapon, he will not be able to withstand all. While he was thinking, the girl kept crying and you could see on her face that she was begging for help. Suddenly Inhin came up with a brilliant idea that might work. If he can't do it on his own, there are other ways. He went back to the pack of wolves and they were to take part in his plan. Using his sling, he threw a stone at one of the wolves and it hit him right in the head. The wolf fell and there was a pool of blood around it. The other wolves noticed this and became furious. They noticed Inhin standing not far from them. The whole pack of wolves started running after him, and that was part of his plan. He was going to lead the wolves to the location of the orcs and get them to fight. The orcs heard the wolves barking and became a little wary. Finally, Inhin led the wolves straight to the orcs, and at that moment he jumped on a tree branch and caught on it, thus securing himself. A few seconds later the battle between the wolves and the orcs began. Everything happened exactly as Inhin had planned. The women prisoners were in a special room that was guarded by 1 orc. Inhin went in there, and it was his chance to save all the prisoners. Immediately he was spotted by a huge, angry orc who swung his club at him. Inhin had no problem dodging the blow, and he ran around behind him and started to spin the sling to attack the orc. He threw the stone and it hit him right in the jaw, after which the orc died for good. It looks like he was the only guard, Inhin thought. If you think about it, orcs aren't that different from humans. They even use guards to protect things. Inhin walked on and lit everything with his homemade torch. As he walked on he saw 5 women just sitting on the floor. You could tell they were in fear and sadness at the same time. He tries to explain to them that they all need to leave as soon as possible. Inhin went first to light the way and they followed right behind him. When they went outside they saw orcs and wolves, who continued to fight among themselves. Suddenly one of the orcs turned around and noticed that Inhin and their hostages were running away. Inhin had already prepared to attack the orc when suddenly he was attacked by a wolf, and it was the perfect chance for them to escape. So they seized the opportunity and started running away. Luckily they succeeded, and within 20 minutes they were safe and relatively far from the orcs. These women were a little afraid because they could not be sure that Inhin saved them with good intentions. Inhin tried to call out to Mila, who was nearby and was waiting for him to come back. When she heard Inhin's voice, Mila came out from behind the trees and saw that he had succeeded in saving them all. The girls saw their friend Mila and were very happy. The next day they all went to their village and Inhin decided to go with them. On the way, Inhin noticed that Mila and the other girls were very hungry. After a couple of minutes he noticed a tree with juicy fruits and decided to get them. He struck the tree with his powerful hand so that the fruit fell. The girls saw the fruit sprinkled and were very happy to be able to eat. They also thanked him in their language. They went on and suddenly Mila felt a sharp pain and fell to the ground. Inhin of course noticed this and immediately tried to help her. He looked at her feet, and they were all scratched and bloody. With that in mind, he offered to carry her on his shoulders. Mila latched onto his back and they continued on their way. After an hour they finally reached the village where they were met by guards. Everyone was very happy and they went inside the village. Inhin went into the house where Mila had led him, and apparently the village elder decided to thank him. Judging by the general atmosphere, he realized that Mila was most likely the granddaughter of the elder, and the woman standing on the right was her grandmother. As a thank you they brought him food. The food looked inedible, but he decided to try it because he wanted to be polite. He tasted the food and almost threw up from the horrible taste. But out of politeness he pretended that he liked the food very much. When Inhin went to wash, he felt sick from eating all that food. He would have thrown up if not for the fruit he then ate. Anyway, he wondered what he should do now. He wanted to stay in this village, but he couldn't understand what the villagers were talking about. He realized that he had probably completely cured the cancer because if his liver had not recovered, his hormones would have been inactive, and he would not have been able to gain as much muscle. Inhin turned around and noticed Mila standing on the shore. She brought him clothes and stared at him, for Inhin was the handsomest guy in their village. He had a lot of abs on his body that stood out, and were very pumped up. Mila put her clothes on the ground and ran away in shame. After a few hours, it got dark outside and Inhin went to his room and lay on his bed. His body was very tired, but he couldn't sleep because it was the first real bed he had slept on since he came to this world, and it was unfamiliar to him. The next day in one of the towers there was a conversation between two influential people. Some old man persuaded a man to choose his faction. The old man argued that it is better to choose the side that has a valid claim when the forces of the factions are equal. They were talking in some complicated terms, and they also talked about Prince Isola, who was incompetent. Prince Isola was too good-natured and not the right man for them to rule in these difficult times. The second Prince Jutura was smart and well suited to the role of ruler, but he looked down on those below him, so they knew they would be betrayed after serving him. The man's name was Lord Viton, and they were joined in their dialogue by Knight Chiani, who was ordered to assemble all the knights and mercenaries. He was also ordered to go around the village and enlist all men over the age of 15. After a while, most of the village was gathered in a circle. They began to say that in recent months there has been a dispute about who would be heir to the throne, as the other princes declared that they, too, were the rightful heirs to the throne. So it was time to take up arms and defend their positions. Lord Witan ordered the men of the village to take up their spears and take part in this war. The men of the village, of course, were not happy with this and did not want to sacrifice their lives. They understood that if they went to war they would die a miserable and useless death. The man who ordered them to go to narrate got very angry when he saw the other men rioting. So he drew his sword and said that anyone who refuses the draft will be executed. The men of the village realized they had no way out and ran in fear to gather their things, while Inhin continued to stand his ground. The fat man with the sword asked him, "Why are you standing there? Have you decided to resist me?" Since Inhin had already begun to learn their language, he tried to explain the situation that he was not from here. The Grand Master looked at him and realized that he was really not from here because he had black hair and black eyes. The fat man with the sword was angry with him because he thought that Inhin dared to contradict him. So he took a leather whip and tried to strike Inhin. Inhin had no trouble dodging this blow and bouncing to the side. The man tried to hit Inhin again, but this time Inhin grabbed the whip and dragged it in his direction. The aggressive man fell to the ground and said, "Motherfucker, how do you let yourself do that?" The people standing nearby were shocked to realize what Inhin had just done. Immediately the knights who stood by pointed their swords at him and were ready to kill him for such an act. Luckily the village elder intervened and explained that Inhin was not a resident of their village and that he was Medaka. Many people called him that, and Inhin still could not understand who Medaka was. The Grand Master ordered the swords to be put aside and said that if Inhin really is a Medaka, he is unfamiliar with their standards of behavior. The village elder explained that some time ago the village girls were kidnapped by orcs from the Forest of Darkness, and this Medaka saved the village girls and has stayed here ever since. The Grand Master wondered and asked, "Did he save them alone?" To which the elder replied yes. The head knight could not understand how Inhan went alone against the orcs, even considering that he is a Medaka. The chief knight realized that even if he gathered the whole army, he would not be able to save the village girls. He asked Inhan what his name was, and Inhan said his name was Karma, which was his name in their ancient language. Henceforth the chief knight called him Medaka Karma. Legend has it that the Medaki who come down from the mountains have impressive fighting skills, so the chief knight invited Inhan to fight alongside them, and said he would give a generous reward for doing so. Milla tried to explain to Inhan what the head knight had in mind, and after Inhan realized what he was being offered, he immediately refused and said he hated battles. He did not want to join another man's battle and kill people he stood in misunderstanding, and categorically refused to do so. Inhan said bluntly that they were finished and that he was going to leave the village. He thanked Milla in his own language for 2 months of caring, but now he really had to go. The head knight said to Inhan, "Milla is apparently in love with you, but you go off and leave her? You Medaks are definitely heartless creatures." After that, the head knight said that unfortunately, Inhan could not leave. Inhan was angry because he realized what the head knight was trying to say. He said that all this territory was the property of the Baron, and since Inhan had eaten food grown on this territory, he now belonged to the Baron, and was obliged to fight in this war. The Medaki are known for their strength and stubbornness, but also the head knight believed that they were completely loyal to whoever they obeyed. So the Grand Master wanted to beat Inhan, and thereby subdue him, and make him a useful soldier. In spite of the Grand Master's words, he still said he was leaving the village and refusing to participate in the war. Inhan said he was not going to obey, and the Grand Master began to draw his sword. He drew his sword and put it to Inhan's throat, saying he would force him to obey. He also said to give Inhan a sword as well so they could have a fair fight. Inhan agreed to the fight, but said he would not take the sword, but would take his weapon. The Grand Master wanted to see what Inhan was capable of, so he agreed to these terms. Inhan began to prepare for battle and put a stone in his sling. The knights, standing nearby, thought that it was extremely stupid and ridiculous to fight with a stone against the Grand Master with a sword. Finally they had a battle, and Inhan began to spin the sling and aim it. The Grand Master had never heard of such a strange weapon that Medaka would use. The Grand Master was angry because he thought Inhan was trying to fool him with his strange tricks. The Grand Master went to attack him, but it was too late because Inhan launched a stone at him with a sling. The blow was very strong and the Grand Master was immediately knocked down and fell to the ground. Since he was wearing armor, the blow was not fatal, but very traumatic and painful. After that, Inhan immediately began to run away and was about to leave the village. The Grand Master shouted and ordered him to be seized, for they could not lose such a Medaka. The knights chased after him and the Grand Master stood and speculated what kind of weapon it was that had done so much damage. It was a dark night, and they never managed to find and catch Medaka. Lord Witan and his Baron were in one of the towers, talking to the Grand Master and his subjects. The Grand Master said he was very ashamed and that it would never happen again. Lord Witan was angry and did not understand how the Grand Master was defeated by some stone. The Grand Master took all the blame and said that this savage had a strange weapon he had never seen before. The Baron, who was standing nearby, said that legend has it that some Medaka killed a swordsman in the past, so the Grand Master should not be ashamed of his defeat. But Lord Vitan said that in legends from the past, the Medaks killed the Sword Master from ambush, and the Grand Master lost in a one-on-one battle over some stone. Hearing this, the Baron showed Lord Vitan the Grand Master's armor, which had a huge dent from the stone. The Baron said that Medaka with a simple stone damaged the Grand Master's armor, and was even able to break his bones. Lord Vitan thought about it, and realized that a simple stone really couldn't do that much damage, and that something else was involved. His musings were interrupted by the Baron, who said that they searched his room after he escaped and found a very strange object. It was an ordinary flashlight, but at that time no one knew about the existence of such an object. The Baron pressed the flashlight button and Lord Witan was immediately startled by what he saw. He realized it was some kind of magic and said so. The Baron agreed with him but said it wasn't like magic, like a fire step, or like a scroll with fire magic sealed in it. Also Baron noticed that he only pressed the bulge and then the light came out of the object, which in addition was not hot. Also Medaki had a weapon capable of damaging such strong armor. They realized there was something they didn't know about it. The Baron said he thought the Medaki might have found an ancient dungeon. In his opinion, there was no other way to explain how that man got that kind of artifact and that strange weapon, and there could also be other treasures in the ancient dungeon inside. The Baron also questioned the villagers, who said that Inhan had told them he had come to see what the civilized world looked like, and if this was true, he would not go back because of what had happened. They realized that Inhun would take advantage of the time he had and sooner or later show up somewhere again, and that's when they would have a chance to capture him. Lord Vitan ordered the Grand Master that next time he would not let Medaka escape. The Grand Master swore that no matter what, this time they would catch him for sure. The next day in the morning, the knights walked through the woods and looked around for Inhun. Sensing danger, he spent most of his time high up in the branches of trees. Since he was already far away, he realized that the knights probably would not have pursued him so deep into the woods. He pondered what he should do next and thought of crossing the woods and going somewhere else. But Inhun realized that he should not underestimate the size of the forest, and that he might get lost and not be able to get out until he was dead. When the drafting is completed and it is time for the knights to march, they will cease their search. But until then Inhun will sit tight and then make his escape. It was evening, and all day Inhun sat in the tree. Then he went downstairs and saw the knights coming back. Inhun followed the knights and the village until morning. As expected, the knights ceased their search and began to leave the village in the morning. Now Inhun could leave the forest in peace. He was sorry that he was leaving the village without saying goodbye to Milla, but there was no other way. Suddenly he heard a screech and realized it was an arrow flying toward him. Luckily it didn't hit him. He noticed the knights who apparently noticed him first and tried to kill him. The knights shot arrows at him with their crossbow. Also among them was the Grand Master, who told Inhun that this time he would not escape. It was a trap and the knights were deliberately waiting for Inhun to let his guard down and feel safe. The Grand Master told him to surrender or else they would kill him. Without thinking too much, Inhun quickly jumped up a tree and started running away. The Grand Master marveled at his incredible ability to jump and ordered him to shoot at it. The knights began to do his bidding and actively fired their crossbows at Inhun. He was jumping through trees and dodging arrows when suddenly one of the arrows almost flew right into his back. He was able to react in time to dodge her. Because of this he accidentally slipped and lost his balance. So he began to fall all the way down to the ground. When he fell, his back hit the ground hard. Not a few seconds later the knights threw a large iron net over him. He saw this and reacted by pulling his dagger out of his pocket. Inhun channeled his chi energy directly into the dagger, and with that cut the iron net with the dagger. The knights were frightened because they thought Inhun knew how to use mana. Suddenly an old man ran up to Inhun and used his magic trick. His magic trick was called holding. He used a magic trick with his staff and this trick could hold the enemy and not let him move. Inhun realized that no matter how hard he tried he could not move. At that moment, the magician shouted and became indignant. Why is everyone just standing there looking at him? Better hurry up and grab him. The knights heard him and had already begun to run toward Inhun. Inhun knew he couldn't just give up, so he tried to use all his chi energy to break the spell. He succeeded and broke the spell. The mage was in complete shock and did not understand how Medaka has such great power. Inhun immediately began to run away, but unfortunately the knights had already surrounded him and were pointing their sharp weapons at him. He had no choice but to jump up the tree again and try to escape. He began to quickly jump and run from tree to tree because he knew that this battle would be eternal if he tried to fight them all. The Grand Master did not kill him, but aimed at his feet so that he could not escape. As he was jumping, suddenly one of the arrows hit him right in the leg and it bled. So he immediately fell to the ground and felt a very strong pain. The knights immediately seized the moment and threw an iron net at him. So that he could not cut through the net, they threw several pieces on him and then piled on him so that he could not move. The Grand Master came up to him and said, "You're like a wild animal. Have you calmed down at all?" There was a man who wanted to meet Inhun, and so if he didn't want to die he would have to go with them. After a while they returned to the village and Inhun was upset about what had happened. Lord Vitan was extremely surprised that Inhun was able to free himself from the spell of Conrad, so-called Baron and Mage at the same time. Lord Witan took out a flashlight and asked Inhun where he got such an object. Inhun replied that he had brought the item from his home. Lord Vitan shouted and told Inhun not to lie to me because Madaki could not make such a device. He assumed that Inhun had obtained this device from a hidden ancient dungeon. Inhun tried to explain to him that he didn't know anything about the dungeon and that he had many of these things at home. Lord Vitan did not believe Inhun, for he knew that the Madaks, who were savages, could not be civilized enough to do such a thing. Baron said he didn't think this Madaka would lie after coming all the way here. He figured they needed to get a better handle on it. Lord Witan was holding an incomprehensible weapon that broke Grand Master Chang's shoulder. Lord Vitan did not understand how such a weapon could destroy the armor, nor did he know how to use it. He said he would not believe Grand Master Chang could lose to such a weapon until he saw its use in battle with his own eyes. He ordered Inhun to show him how to use the weapon. They went outside and checked and watched as Inhun used the weapons on the iron armor. They did not understand how iron armor could be so easily destroyed by a miserable stone. Lord Witan told Inhun to swear allegiance to him, and for that he would reward him generously. Inhin turned around and refused and then called Lord Witan a bastard. Lord Witan impulsively drew his sword and wanted to strike Inhin. Baron Conrad told him to stop as this man dispelled his spell and masterfully repelled all attacks. There was a lot they could learn because of Inhin, so they needed him alive. Lord Witan ordered that Inhin be put in solitary confinement and given just enough food to survive, but no more. They planned to use a brainwashing spell on him in the future. He was in solitary confinement, and his leg was very swollen because he received almost no medical attention. The inflammation made him feel as if he was about to die of fever. He realized that at this rate he could really die. So he sat down in a meditative pose and began to meditate, trying to heal his leg with chi energy. His leg was throbbing, and this was proof that it was recovering. He planned to use meditation to speed up the rate of regeneration and heal the wounds. In this way he will be able to get rid of bad blood and purify it. Suddenly he heard someone say the word supper, and Inhin saw 3 loaves of bread being thrown into his cell. Inhin realized he had been unconscious all day. He was not hungry but decided to eat because he needed to recover, and his body needed to be healthy to keep his sanity. After that he decided to work out. He did push-ups, squats, and worked out his abs. Since he was weakened he could not even do 100 push-ups, considering that when he was in the woods he could do as many as 500 push-ups without any difficulty. 2 whole months went by and his routine was the same day in and day out. One day when he was meditating he felt something very strange. He opened his eyes and for a few seconds was able to see what was behind the wall of the prison cell. Inhin definitely did not expect this and did not understand what happened. It was something like X-ray vision. He had heard that mastering meditation could give supernatural powers, and apparently this turned out to be true. For the past 2 months he has resisted the loneliness, hunger, and cold of sitting in a horrible cell only through meditation and willpower. He wasn't going to rot here anymore and decided it was time for him to get out. Inhin realized it was time for him to use the object. He was lucky they didn't confiscate it because they thought it was a piece of wood. Then he checked the overall structure of the castle with his X-ray vision. He pushed the knife into the narrow slot and prepared to cut the lock. He tensed up and concentrated on channeling his chi energy correctly. Inhin had to focus his chi on the tip of the knife and thus cut the lock. He put in almost all his efforts and prayed that it would work. Luckily it worked for him, and the lock was red hot from the energy of the chi. Without thinking long, he opened the door and started running out of there. He ran a little and saw the guards who were in his way. The chief guard ordered his subjects not to let Inhin leave. Inhin couldn't remember where the exit was and shielded his eyes from the bright light. He was surrounded by guards who blocked his way out. It was very painful for him to open his eyes because he had been in solitary confinement in the dark for so long. But suddenly he saw what was in front of him even though his eyes were closed. Everything was a shade of purple. He was surprised and thought it must also be the power of a long meditation. He then immediately elbowed one of the guards in the stomach, and then punched 3 more guards. The remaining 2 guards were shocked and aggressively called him a bastard. Inhin could see them and feel their movements even though his eyes were closed. He could also see their weaknesses, which glowed green. One of the guards wasted no time and ran to attack Inhin. Inhin easily repelled and evaded attacks. Even if his eyes were closed he could sense who would attack him and how. Inhin stopped ducking and struck the big guard in the stomach. He took him by the scruff of the neck and shouted that those weak blows weren't enough to knock him out. Inhin knew that if he did nothing, he would be dragged back to the cage. He couldn't let that happen, so he put his hand in his pocket. Inhin knew that if he backed off, he might die this time, so he decided to take a desperate step. He took a knife out of his pocket and stuck it in the neck of the big guard. The guard almost immediately began to fall to the floor and let Inhin go. Inhin's eyes got used to the light a little, and he thought he could open them now. He looked at the man he had killed and realized it was no longer an orc, but a real person. Suddenly 2 more guards arrived and heard the screams and came to the rescue. But Inhin wasn't going to fight them because his main goal was to get out of here. At this time Lord Witan was sitting in his room, celebrating his next victory by drinking alcohol. The more he thought about his victories, the more the choice to join Prince Isola seemed like an excellent decision. It was his chance to expand his territory and increase his power. Lord Witan raised his mug and was glad that he was about to become richer and richer. Suddenly, his servant ran into his room without knocking, saying they were in big trouble. He told the news that Inhin had escaped from his prison cell and then from their castle. He explained that Inhin had somehow beaten all the guards and made his way out of the castle. Lord Witan was furious and ordered him to be found at all costs. He said that until they find him, no one is coming home. Night had fallen, but the knights were still searching for Inhin, lighting the way with torches. Already at that time, they had trained dogs to look for Inhin's direction by scent. The knights were discussing the situation among themselves and were going to teach this savage a lesson when they found him. One of the knights turned to Lord Witan and said it would be wise to stop searching this night, as it is too dark and also the dogs are frightened because the area is filled with beasts. The knight suggested that he continue the search during the day, but Lord Witton was vehemently opposed to the idea. He said that whoever says such an idea again will be locked up with Inhin. Inhin spoiled the mood of Lord Witton, who was celebrating his victory, and so when he caught him he was going to torture him until he refused on the verge of death and then force Inhin to obey him. At this time, Inhin stood and felt that the knights were 300 paces away and they would not be able to see him using the torches. But he could feel them. He could feel their every movement. Inhin was also aware that the knights were now desperately searching for him. Lord Witton was the one who locked him up even though Inhin was innocent. All of Inhin's terrible suffering was because of this man. Inhin didn't want to kill anyone, but if his survival depended on it, he was willing to take that step. Inhin knew that if he killed Lord Witton, the others would surrender and flee. Lord Witton continued to search for Inhin, unaware that he was already near him. Suddenly Lord Witton heard the loud sound of a flying stone. The flying stone hit a branch that was right in front of Lord Witton. The horse he was riding got frightened and sprang to its hind hooves, thereby toppling Lord Witton to the ground. Other knights approached him and offered to help, asking if he was wounded. At this point, Inhin realized that because he had been in prison for so long, his weapon skills had deteriorated. He began to spin the sling again because he had to finish Lord Witton quickly before the knights came closer. At this time the dogs smelled Inhin and started barking loudly. The rope with which Inhin untwisted the sling began to tear. It could not withstand being untwisted because Inhin was in a hurry when he tried to make it, so he decided to use the power of chi energy to make the rope stronger. Now he could definitely kill Lord Witton with one hit. Finally he launched the stone and prayed that he would not miss. After a second Lord Witton noticed a stone flying at him, but it was too late to try to dodge it. The rock hit Lord Witton's body at speed. Literally immediately from the shock wave he fell to the ground. One of the knights saw this and shouted loudly. Lord Witton was attacked. After that, several other knights ran up to him and tried to help him. Inhin took advantage of the situation and fled from there. Inhin understood that it was more likely that Witton had survived, and this saddened Inhin as he mercilessly made him die. Events moved to a dark forest where another troop from another village went on an expedition. One of the men in the squad, whose name was Lord Cage, and he was in charge, shouts and asks if anyone has any water. He is immediately told to be quieter, because demonic beasts can hear them and attack. Suddenly Lord Barlow, who is also in charge of this mission, saw the demonic beasts approaching and told everyone to take defensive positions. They were cute-looking cats that shouldn't do any harm, but the dark forest is a very treacherous place. The cats came closer and closer to them, but the knights did not stop holding their spears at the ready. Suddenly one of the cats jumped on the spear and ran to attack the knight. They were not ordinary cats. They were demonic cats that thirsted for other people's blood. The cat got its teeth into the knight's shoulder, and a lot of blood came out of the tuba. Finally a battle began between them, but it was hard for the knights because the cats were small, fast, and nimble. One of the knights shouted to Yashima not to stand still and use a spell. Yashima was a mage with no experience in real combat. He saved her from another attacking cat and told her that if she just stood there, the demon cats would kill her at the first opportunity. Lord Cage was the most vicious and unbiased warrior who yelled at Yashima for being useless and useless. He took her by the hair and said that they had agreed before that they would protect her and she would use her magic. Suddenly the cats came at him from behind, but he took the knight standing next to him and covered himself with his body. This knight died, but Lord Cage did not care because he did not value human life but only his own. The knight standing nearby saw it and thought about taking revenge on Lord Cage, but at that moment there was no time for it because there were more and more cats. Lord Cage told Yashima that he would protect her even if he had to sacrifice everyone here. He also told her to use spells or he would throw her to the demonic beasts to eat. She looked in tears at the body of Knight Halbert, who could no longer be helped. She felt pity for him because he had always cared for her. After 10 seconds she used a special spell that weakened and slowed the demonic beasts. After that, she decided to use the spell Wall of Fire to kill or ward off the cats from the knights. In that second, a large wall of fire erupted. But she only roasted a few demon cats and also the fire started to go out too quickly, and it wasn't enough. Yashima decided to double the power of her spells, but it was very difficult for her because she was still learning the 5th circle of magic. But she tried to exert herself and do it. Thanks to this, the cats began to lose and then retreat. Yashima fell to the ground because she was almost out of strength. Lord Cage told her it was a good job but asked that it be faster next time because he had to waste a perfect mercenary. The knight heard this and asked aggressively, "Do you think mercenaries are things?" Lord Kage replied that mercenaries sell their lives for money, so he can do whatever he wants with their lives. The knight said that if Lord Cage thinks so, then nothing can help him, so he decided to terminate the contract and go his own way. The knight said he could not work with someone he simply could not trust and with someone who just so happens to dispose of the lives of others. This knight gave orders to his subjects that from now on their company would leave the expedition. Lord Kage said that soldiers who do not obey the commander on the battlefield will be killed, so he ordered second-in-command Lord Barlow to teach them a lesson. The knights had already drawn their swords and were ready to fight, but Lord Barlow said he wasn't going to kill people and asked Lord Cage, "Are you the leader of this expedition?" Lord Kage angrily replied that the leader of this expedition, Lord Barlow. So Lord Barlow told him not to show off and cause trouble in dangerous terrain. Lord Kage was extremely angry but could do nothing because he was not the leader of the expedition, so they continued on their way. It was starting to get dark and they knew they had to stop walking and make camp. At that moment one of the knights looked to the left and noticed something frightening. It was the orange eyes that were clearly visible even in the evening. Suddenly, from the bushes, a black merciless panther attacked him. She began to tear this knight to shreds and the other knights ran away from her in fear. Suddenly, from behind one of the knights who was watching the situation, standing to the side, appeared a horrible monster with large hands. It had a very intimidating look and killed the knight almost instantly. It was the demonic monkey of the Black Forest that was almost the strongest monster in the forest. One of the knights shouted for everyone to stick together or they would all die here alone. At this point, demon monkeys and a black panther attacked several more people. Lord Barlow ordered the Knights of the Golden Ram to rescue these men. Lord Cage replied that they were not going to do that because if they broke the line, everyone here would die. He needed to save the number of knights they had left, and he did not care about other lives. Lord Cage also ordered his Knights of the Golden Ram to stand around him and hold their ground. At that moment, one of the demon monkeys grabbed Yushima and quickly began to move away. Yushima looked at the knights and expected help from them. The Knights of the Golden Aries wanted to save her and were already ready to start running after her. But Lord Cage forbade them to do so and told them to observe the formation. He said that even if they went after her, they wouldn't be able to save her because she was probably already dead. The knights tried to argue with him, but he shouted loudly that it was an order. Even Lord Barlow agreed with him and said that if she was taken so quickly, she was already dead or too far away. At that moment, the demonic monkey carried Yushima farther and farther away. She realized that she couldn't allow herself to be kidnapped like that, so if she wanted to live she had to use magic. Out of the last of her strength, she decided to use a permanent light spell. A very bright light appeared in front of the demon monkey. Her eyes began to hurt a lot and because of that she closed them and began to fall down. Together with Yushima the monkey fell down and temporarily lost consciousness. It was the perfect opportunity for Yushima to escape. Before she could even get up she saw a very scary sight. In front of her was a black panther with blue glowing eyes that spotted Yushima and headed in her direction. Yushima stood up abruptly and knew she had to try to escape. She started to run away, but it was too late because the panther was many times faster than her. Suddenly Yushima stumbled and fell to the ground, knowing that now she would surely die. After a few seconds she opened her eyes and saw the dead panther lying there. She saw the stone and realized that someone had killed this panther. Suddenly she saw a man approaching her, and because of that she was frightened. She didn't know who the man was, but she knew he had saved her. She thanked him for his help and heard strange noises behind her. It was a demon monkey that came to consciousness. By smell finding Yushima it pounced on her, but luckily Inhan managed to take a dagger and cut the demon monkey's mouth open. Yushima was surprised and did not understand how this man killed monsters with one stone and dagger. Inhan didn't say a word to her the whole time and she just followed him. She understood that he was not a bad man, so she followed him, because now she had no other choice. Finally they arrived and Yushima saw a small improvised tent. They went inside and Yushima said, "Wow, what an unusual house." She had never seen a house this shape. He had fruit and various survival gear in his tent. Suddenly he turned on the lighter with his hand and fire came out. That surprised Yushima even more. She thought Inhan was a magician and used spells to light a fire. Yushima asked him for help in tears because she was separated from her goods and now they might be in danger. She didn't look like a bad person, but Inhan wasn't going to help her so carelessly. He didn't want the same thing to happen as last time. She kept asking him for help and said her comrades were in the dark forest. She was sure it wasn't far from here. Inhan finally told her that she was not a mage and asked if she was a mage since he saw that she had used a spell when she was captured by that monkey. She was glad that Inhan could speak and answered that she was a mage. After Inhan asked her if she could read and write in their language, she replied that of course she could because she was a mage. He thought about it and told her he would help her on one condition. He could speak but could not read or write in their language, so he asked her to teach him how to read and use magic. Yushima replied that it would take 6 months to teach him the basics of reading and writing, and magic is a difficult subject to learn and could take a lifetime at all. Hearing this, Inhan said that she would just have to try to train him, and mastering it would be his task. She agreed to his terms and gave her word, after which she asked him to help her. Inhan said it was dangerous to do anything in this forest at night, so they would sleep in this tent and only go out during the day. She was embarrassed and asked, "Sleep here with you?" Eventually she agreed, and waking up the next day, they went in search of her companions. Yushima asked him if he was Medaka, and Inhan asked what the word meant. She explained that Medaki are people who live in the dark forest. There are many kinds of demonic beasts, and some of them are so strong that it is hard to imagine why few people live in the forest. Medaks are people who live in this forest despite the danger, which is why she asked Medak if he. Inhan finally understands who the Medaki are. Yushima heard that there are magicians among the Medak too, and asked about the flaming instrument if it was made by a Medak magician. Inhan understood that she was talking about an ordinary lighter. He replied that he didn't know any magicians and lied about how in the past when he was young he found a strange cave and picked up this object there. She had a look of delight in her eyes and said it was supposed to be an ancient dungeon. She asked him if he remembered where the dungeon was, and he said he didn't because it was too long ago. Yushima got upset and asked him if he wanted to trade the item for